At our 18th wedding anniversary dinner, my husband calmly smiled across the candlelit table and said he'd finally found the perfect woman. He even assured me she loved him for who he was, not for his money. I smiled back. Congratulations! Then I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and sent exactly one text message to my attorney. Execute everything. 43 minutes later, his company credit card stopped working. That was the moment he realized the future he'd been planning no longer existed. If anyone had walked past our table that evening, they would have assumed they were looking at a couple celebrating a milestone. The restaurant overlooked the Chicago River. The windows reflected hundreds of tiny lights dancing on the water, and soft jazz floated through the dining room. Couples laughed over wine, waiters moved quietly between tables, and someone in the corner toasted a retirement. It looked like the kind of place people chose to celebrate a life they were proud of. 18 years of marriage. That number had always meant something to me. Not because I believed every marriage should last forever, but because 18 years represented countless ordinary moments. Packing school lunches, arguing over paint colors, driving to soccer practice in freezing Illinois winters, waiting together through my father's surgery, celebrating promotions, mourning losses, paying mortgages, building a life one ordinary Tuesday after another. I thought we had built something real. Apparently only one of us had. Daniel looked unusually relaxed that night. Too relaxed. His charcoal suit was new, his haircut was fresher than usual. Even his watch, the expensive one he'd bought 3 years earlier after becoming CEO, had been polished. He looked like a man preparing for a celebration. Just not ours. The waiter poured another glass of Cabernet before asking if we were ready to order dessert. Daniel smiled politely. We're going to skip dessert. Something in his voice made me put my fork down. After 18 years, you learn the language your spouse never speaks aloud. His shoulders were too loose. His smile was rehearsed. His eyes never quite settled on mine. I've been meaning to talk to you, he said. I folded my napkin carefully into my lap. I figured. He blinked. You did? I nodded. I just didn't know when. For a second, he looked almost disappointed that I wasn't surprised. Then he leaned back. I've met someone. There it was. No hesitation. No apology. Just a statement. As if he were announcing he'd accepted a new job. I looked at him quietly. He mistook my silence for permission to continue. Her name is Vanessa. He actually smiled. I wasn't looking for this. That sentence almost made me laugh. Nobody ever looked for betrayal after they'd already found it. It just happened. Of course it did. It always just happened. According to people like Daniel, affairs appeared out of thin air, completely unrelated to hundreds of deliberate decisions. He folded his hands together. I've never planned to hurt you. I kept listening. You've changed over the years. There it was. The first attempt to make me responsible. You became so focused on work, on schedules, on responsibilities. I almost reminded him that someone had needed to keep our lives running while he chased promotions across the Midwest. Someone had remembered pediatric appointments. Someone had stayed up helping our daughter study for chemistry exams. Someone had visited my father every single evening during hospice. But I said nothing. He continued. I stopped feeling like your husband. Instead, you became more like my business partner. Interesting. Because I'd spent 18 years believing partnership was exactly what marriage required. I didn't even realize how lonely I was until I met Vanessa. He said her name softly, almost reverently, as if she'd reminded me who I used to be. Then came the sentence he clearly believed would make me understand. She loves me for me. I waited. She doesn't care about money. That was the moment I knew he'd already rewritten our entire marriage inside his own head. Because if he'd been paying attention for even 1 minute during the past 18 years, he'd have remembered something important. When I met Daniel, he had absolutely no money. He was 27, driving a used Honda Accord with 2 different colored doors. working 60-hour weeks for a manufacturing company outside Naperville, sharing an apartment with another engineer. My father had liked him because he was ambitious. I had loved him because he was kind. Money had arrived much later. Apparently, memory hadn't. Daniel mistook my silence for agreement. I know this is difficult. No. Actually, what was difficult was listening to a man erase 18 years of history in under 5 minutes. I think we should divorce while we still respect each other. Respect. Interesting choice of words. He reached across the table. I want this to be civilized. Civilized. As though he'd generously decided not to start screaming in the restaurant. As painless as possible. He kept talking. We'll sell the house. Actually, we wouldn't. I'll make sure you're comfortable. That almost made me smile. I don't want you worrying about finances. No, he definitely hadn't been paying attention. Our daughter is old enough to understand. Emily had turned 21 the month before. College senior. Smart. Compassionate. Stubborn enough to inherit both our personalities. I hope she'll understand that people change. People do change. Sometimes so slowly you barely notice. Other times all at once, during dessert. The waiter arrived carrying a chocolate soufflé someone had mistakenly prepared. My apologies, he said. Wrong table. Daniel laughed politely. I watched the waiter disappear. Then I looked back at my husband. For the first time all evening, I truly saw him. Not the man I'd married. Not the father of my daughter. Not even the executive who now managed hundreds of employees. Just a middle-aged man absolutely convinced he'd discovered happiness because a younger woman admired the lifestyle he'd spent years building. A lifestyle he believed belonged entirely to him. Finally, I smiled. A genuine smile. Not because I was happy. Because everything had suddenly become very clear. Congratulations, I said softly. He frowned. What? I said congratulations. His expression became confused. I expected you to be angrier? He nodded cautiously. I've cried enough already. His forehead wrinkled. What do you mean? Nothing. I picked up my purse. I'm going to freshen up. I walked calmly through the restaurant. Past families celebrating birthdays. Past couples sharing appetizers. Past the hostess arranging menus. I stepped into the quiet hallway outside the restrooms. Then I opened my phone. There was only one message waiting in my drafts. Prepared 6 months earlier. One sentence. Execute everything. I pressed send. My attorney replied less than 15 seconds later. Understood. That was all. No drama. No celebration. Just professionalism. I slipped my phone back into my purse, checked my reflection, and returned to the table. Daniel was checking baseball scores on his phone. He smiled when I sat down. I really appreciate how mature you're being. I almost pitied him. Almost. We finished dinner discussing completely ordinary things. Emily's graduation. The Cubs. Traffic on Interstate 90. The weather forecast. 43 minutes after I sent that text. Our waiter returned carrying the leather folder. Daniel reached inside without looking. He removed his corporate American Express card. The waiter disappeared. Less than a minute later, he returned again. I'm terribly sorry, sir. Daniel frowned. There seems to be an issue with this card. Daniel laughed. Must be fraud protection. He tried again. Declined. His smile faded. That's strange. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His executive assistant. He answered casually. Then his face changed. What do you mean I can't access the system? Silence. What board meeting? Longer silence. I'm the CEO. Another pause. Finally. What do you mean effective immediately? He slowly lowered the phone. For the first time that evening, he looked afraid. I quietly reached for my own purse. And for the first time in 6 months, I finally believed I was going to survive this. Daniel stared at his phone as though the answer might change if he looked at it long enough. "What did she say?" I asked. He didn't respond immediately. The waiter stood a few feet away, pretending not to listen while holding the declined card between two fingers. Around us, silverware clinked against china. Someone laughed near the bar, and the river continued shining beyond the windows as though nothing had happened. Finally, Daniel looked up. "There's been some kind of mistake." "What kind?" "My access has been suspended." "To what?" He gave me a sharp look. "The company." I nodded once. "That sounds serious." He studied my face, searching for panic, guilt, satisfaction, anything that might explain why I wasn't reacting the way he expected. "Do you know something about this?" I reached into my purse and removed my personal visa. "I know we should pay the bill." His mouth tightened. "Claire." "Not here." He leaned toward me. "What did you do?" The waiter shifted uncomfortably. I handed him my card. "Please run this one." Daniel sat back, humiliated less by the interruption than by the fact that I had paid for dinner. For years, he had loved using the corporate card at expensive restaurants, always leaving it visible long enough for people to notice the company name embossed beneath his own. That habit had become one of the first things that made me suspicious. 6 months earlier, I had been standing in our kitchen on a rainy Tuesday morning, sorting mail beside the coffee maker. Daniel had already left for what he called an early meeting in Oak Brook. Most of the envelopes were ordinary: utilities, insurance notices, a catalog I never remembered requesting. Then I found the credit card statement. I had no reason to open it. The account belonged to the company, and Daniel handled his own expense reports. But the envelope had been torn near the edge, and when I picked it up, one page slipped halfway out. A charge caught my eye. The Drake Hotel. 2 nights. Friday and Saturday. Daniel had told me he was attending a manufacturing conference in Milwaukee that weekend. I stood there with the coffee cooling in my hand, reading the line 3 times. At first, I did what wives often do when the truth is too painful to accept. I explained it away. Maybe the company had moved the conference. Maybe he had met a client downtown. Maybe the billing date was wrong. Then I saw the restaurant charge from the same weekend. A French place in the Gold Coast. $286. Daniel hated French food. I sat at the kitchen island listening to rain tap against the windows and felt something inside me shift. Not break. Not yet. Just move slightly out of place. That evening, I asked him how Milwaukee had been. He didn't hesitate. Cold, boring, same people saying the same things. Where did you stay? The Pfister. He opened the refrigerator and reached for sparkling water. Why? No reason. He kissed my cheek and walked away. That lie was so effortless it frightened me more than the hotel bill. Still, I didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, I tried harder. That is the part people rarely understand. When you suspect your marriage is dying, your first instinct is not always revenge. Sometimes it is repair. I suggested dinner without phones. He said he was exhausted. I booked a weekend in Galena. He spent most of it answering messages. I found a marriage counselor in Evanston and left the brochure on his desk. He barely glanced at it. Do you really think we need this? I think we need something. He sighed as though my concern were another household task I had assigned him. We're fine, Claire. We were not fine. A month later, I noticed a new password on his phone. Then came the late meetings, the gym membership he suddenly used, the shirts he began sending to a dry cleaner near his office instead of the one in our neighborhood. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things that look meaningless until they form a pattern. The final confirmation came from perfume. Daniel returned from a client dinner one Thursday night and hugged me from behind while I was loading the dishwasher. For 1 second, I smelled something floral on his jacket. Not my perfume. Not anything our daughter wore. I froze with a plate in my hand. He didn't notice. That was when I called the attorney. Her name was Margaret Ellis, and she had handled legal matters for my father's company for nearly 20 years. She was in her late 50s, direct without being cold, and incapable of dramatizing anything. Her office was downtown on Wacker Drive, 12 floors above the river. I sat across from her with both hands around a paper cup of coffee and told her everything. When I finished, she asked one question. "What do you want?" "I want to know whether I'm losing my mind." "You're not?" "I want proof." She nodded. "And after that?" I looked toward the window. "I don't know." Margaret leaned back. "Then don't decide yet." She recommended a private investigator and a forensic accountant. The investigator confirmed the affair within 11 days. Vanessa Hale, 38, marketing consultant, recently divorced. She and Daniel had met at an industry conference in Dallas. The photographs were quiet and devastating. Dinner, a hotel lobby, his hand at the small of her back. A kiss beside a parking garage elevator. I cried in Margaret's office bathroom for nearly 20 minutes. Then I washed my face, returned to the conference room, and asked to see the financial records. That was when grief began turning into clarity. Daniel had not only used company money for dinners and hotels, he had charged airfare, jewelry, a weekend in Napa, and monthly payments for a furnished apartment in River North. The apartment was listed as executive housing. No executive had ever stayed there. The forensic accountant also found payments to a consulting firm called Hale Strategic Partners, Vanessa's company. The invoices were vague. Brand positioning, client engagement, market analysis, nearly $140,000 over 18 months. Some of the work may have been legitimate. Most of it could not be documented. Margaret looked across the table at me. "This is bigger than an affair." I knew that. What Daniel did not know was that he had never owned the company. My father had founded Langford Industrial Systems in 1989. Years later, when he became ill, he placed controlling shares into a family trust for me and Emily. Daniel had risen through the company because he was talented. My father respected him, promoted him, and eventually recommended him for CEO, but the shares remained in the trust. The house had also been purchased largely with money I inherited after my father died, and the deed had been structured accordingly. Daniel had authority. He had status. He had income. But he did not have ownership. He had simply lived like those were the same thing. Over the next 6 months, Margaret helped me prepare quietly. We updated my estate documents, protected the trust, separated personal liquidity, copied records, reviewed the operating agreement, alerted 2 board members to a possible fiduciary investigation without disclosing the affair. The board authorized emergency action if additional evidence appeared. Then we waited. Margaret repeatedly warned me not to provoke him. "Let him make his own choices," she said. "And if he leaves? Then he leaves." The night before our anniversary, she called me. "Everything is ready." I sat alone in my car outside a grocery store, watching people push carts beneath the parking lot lights. She asked, "When the moment comes, are you prepared to follow through?" My throat tightened. I thought about 18 Christmas mornings, 18 anniversaries, our daughter's first day of kindergarten, my father's funeral, every version of Daniel I had loved. Then I thought about the effortless lie in our kitchen. "Yes," I said. Back at the restaurant, Daniel watched me sign the receipt. His phone rang again. This time he didn't answer. He looked at me instead. "You planned this." I placed the pen down carefully. "No, Daniel." I met his eyes. "You did." Daniel waited until we were inside the parking garage before he raised his voice. The restaurant's polished calm vanished behind us, replaced by concrete pillars, fluorescent lights, and the distant echo of tires moving across another level. It was late enough that most of the garage had emptied, and our footsteps sounded too loud. "You had no right," he said. I stopped beside the elevator. "No right to what?" "To interfere with my job." "I didn't interfere with your job. You had my access suspended." "The board suspended your access." "You contacted them." "Yes." His face tightened. You used our marriage to ambush me professionally. I almost admired the speed with which he rearranged reality. You used company money to fund your affair. That is not what happened. Then the audit will clear it up. He stepped closer. You don't understand how this works. I understand exactly how it works. No, Claire, you don't. You sit on paper. I run the company. There it was again. The assumption that ownership was decorative while authority was real. I pressed the elevator button. Daniel gave a humorless laugh. You think a few frozen cards and passwords are going to scare me? I'm not trying to scare you. What are you trying to do? Protect what you were willing to risk. The elevator doors opened. We rode down in silence. At the valet stand, he tried calling his chief financial officer, then the board chair, then his executive assistant again. No one answered. By the time our car arrived, he had decided this was temporary. I'll straighten it out in the morning, he said. I took the keys from the valet. You're not driving. I'm perfectly capable of driving. You had most of a bottle of wine. I'm not drunk. Then consider this one less thing for your attorney to explain. He stared at me for a moment, then climbed into the passenger seat. The drive home took nearly 40 minutes. We passed the darkened high-rises along Lakeshore Drive, merged onto the expressway, and headed west toward the suburbs. Daniel spent most of the ride typing messages, deleting them, then typing again. At one point he said, Vanessa has nothing to do with the company. I kept my eyes on the road. Then, Hale's strategic partners should have excellent records. He turned toward me sharply. How do you know that name? I didn't answer. The silence did more than any accusation could have. When we reached the house, Daniel went straight to his office. I heard drawers opening, cabinet doors slamming, the muted chime of his laptop rejecting one password after another. I changed out of my dress, washed off my makeup, and made tea. It was nearly midnight when he came into the kitchen. My email is locked. Yes. My cloud storage too. Yes. Even my building badge has been deactivated. That's standard during an internal review. He stared at me. You sound like Margaret. She's very clear. He placed both hands on the kitchen island. You've been talking to her for months. Yes. Behind my back. The irony was almost too precise. You don't get to be offended by secrecy tonight. His jaw worked. This is vindictive. No, vindictive would have been posting photographs online or calling Vanessa's ex-husband. His expression shifted. You contacted him? No. Did the investigator? No. That part was true. I had refused. Vanessa's ex-husband was not part of my marriage, and I had no interest in creating collateral damage for entertainment. Daniel straightened. You hired an investigator? Yes. How long have you known? Long enough. He looked toward the dark windows over the sink. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, You should have confronted me. I tried to reach you for months. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. He paced once across the kitchen. This can still be handled privately. The affair can. He stopped. The finances cannot. His phone rang. Vanessa. He looked at the screen, then at me. You should answer, I said. He declined the call. That told me more than if he had taken it. By 8 the next morning, the fantasy he had constructed had begun to shrink. The board convened an emergency meeting by video. Daniel was permitted to attend with counsel, but he was not allowed to access company files independently. His attorney joined from downtown, looking irritated and underprepared. I attended from Margaret's office. The board chair, Robert Klein, spoke first. Daniel, this is an administrative suspension pending review. No final conclusions have been reached. Daniel leaned toward the camera. Then why was my access cut off before I was even informed? Because records indicated ongoing movement of proprietary material. That's absurd. Robert did not react. The audit team identified recent downloads from 2 client directories. For legitimate business purposes. Then you'll have an opportunity to explain. Daniel looked toward me on the screen. This is personal. Margaret spoke before I could. The board's concerns are financial and fiduciary. Daniel's attorney cleared his throat. We would caution everyone against conflating marital allegations with corporate governance. Robert folded his hands. We aren't. Then the controller displayed a summary of disputed expenses. Airfare to Napa, 3 nights at a resort, a diamond bracelet, monthly apartment payments, consulting invoices without supporting deliverables. Daniel's expression changed with each line. Those charges were approved. By whom? Robert asked. I had discretionary authority, not for personal use. They weren't personal. Robert glanced at the report. The bracelet was categorized as client development. Daniel said nothing. The meeting ended with his suspension remaining in place and an independent audit formally authorized. He left Margaret's office building without speaking to me. By noon, Vanessa had called him 11 times. I knew because he finally came home and dropped his phone on the kitchen counter while he poured coffee he did not drink. She's worried, he said. About you? He looked up. Of course about me. The phone rang again. This time he answered and walked into the family room. I did not follow, but the house was quiet. No, the apartment isn't being taken away, he said. A pause. It's company leased, but that doesn't mean anything. Another pause. Vanessa, stop. His voice lowered. I told you, I'll fix it. When he returned, his face was pale. She thinks you're trying to ruin her business. I'm not doing anything to her business. You froze the payments. The board froze disputed vendor payments. She has employees. Then she should be able to document the work. He looked at me with open hatred. You're enjoying this. I searched myself before answering. There was anger in me, yes, and relief, and something that resembled vindication. But enjoyment? No. I'm not enjoying watching you fall apart, I said. I'm relieved you can't keep pretending nothing happened. That afternoon, our daughter called. Emily's name appeared on my phone while I was folding towels in the laundry room. Mom? Her voice was tight. Hi, sweetheart. Dad says you got him suspended. I closed my eyes. He told you that? He said you're using the company to punish him because he wants a divorce. I'm not asking you to take sides. That's not an answer. No, it isn't. She exhaled sharply. Did you freeze his accounts? Company accounts, not his personal checking. Why? Because there's an audit. Because he cheated? Because money may have been misused. Emily went quiet. Then she said, Dad says you've been planning this for months. I've been protecting myself for months. That sounds like the same thing. The words hurt more because they came from her. I sat on the edge of the dryer. I know this is frightening. You're destroying our family. No, Emily. My voice cracked, but I kept it steady. I'm refusing to lie about what happened to it. She hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, Daniel came home carrying a cardboard box from his office. He set it down by the stairs. Temporary, he said. I nodded. He went upstairs. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. It was a photograph of a document. A Hale Strategic Partners invoice. Attached beneath it was an email Daniel had sent from his personal account. Move the client files before Claire notices. Emily wrote only one sentence. Mom, what is this? I stared at the screen. The betrayal had finally reached our daughter. And for the first time, Daniel was no longer controlling the story. I called Emily immediately. She answered on the second ring, but neither of us spoke at first. I could hear movement in the background, doors closing, footsteps, the faint hum of voices. She was probably still in the campus library or one of the study lounges in her apartment building. Where did you get that email? I asked. Dad forwarded me a folder last month, she said. He told me it had old tax documents in case you tried to hide money during the divorce. I closed my eyes. Of course he had. He said I needed to know what you were capable of. The pain in her voice was sharper than anger. Emily, I'm sorry. Did he really send client files to her? That's what the audit is trying to determine. You already knew, didn't you? I knew there were questionable payments. I didn't know about that exact email. She went quiet. Then she asked, "Who is Vanessa?" I had promised myself I would never make our daughter absorb the ugliest details of our marriage unless the truth became necessary. Now Daniel had made it necessary. "She's the woman your father has been seeing." Emily made a small sound, almost like she had stopped breathing. "How long?" "At least 18 months. And he told me you were punishing him because he wanted to leave." "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he's still your father." That didn't stop him from lying to me. "No," I said softly, "it didn't." She began to cry. Not loudly. Emily had cried that way since childhood, quiet, angry tears she hated anyone noticing. "I feel stupid." "You're not stupid." I believed him. "You believed someone you love. That is not stupidity." She sniffed. "What should I do with the files?" "Don't send anything else. Don't confront him. Forward everything to Margaret, then step away." "What if this gets him arrested?" "We don't know that it will." "Would you stop it if you could?" That question sat heavily between us. "I won't protect him from consequences," I said, "but I won't invent consequences either." Emily exhaled shakily. "I need time." "You can have as much as you need." She hung up more gently than she had before. When I walked upstairs, Daniel was standing outside our bedroom. He had changed out of his suit and into sweatpants, but he still looked like he was performing control. "Were you talking to Emily?" "Yes." "What did you tell her?" "The truth." His expression hardened. "You had no right to drag her into this." I stared at him. "You sent her financial documents and told her I might hide money." "I was protecting myself." "From what?" "From exactly this." He gestured toward me, the house, the entire life unraveling around him. "You've turned everyone against me." "No, Daniel. You recruited our daughter into your defense, and then she found evidence you forgot you'd given her." His face changed. "What evidence?" I said nothing. He took a step forward. "Claire, what did she find?" "You should ask your attorney." For the first time, real panic entered his eyes. He turned and walked quickly toward his office. Within minutes, I heard him calling Vanessa. This time, he did not lower his voice. "Did you move anything from the client archive?" A pause. "I'm asking whether you downloaded it." Another pause. "Don't tell me to calm down." His office door slammed. The next morning, the board voted to remove him as CEO pending the outcome of the investigation. The decision was not dramatic. No shouting. No security escort through the lobby. Robert called me after the meeting and explained that Daniel would remain on paid administrative leave for 30 days, while outside counsel reviewed the records. After that, his employment status would depend on the findings. By lunchtime, the company website listed an interim chief executive. Daniel's photograph disappeared from the leadership page before he had finished arguing with his attorney. In the days that followed, his world did not collapse all at once. It narrowed. The River North apartment lease was suspended. His travel reimbursements stopped. His assistant no longer answered his personal requests. Colleagues who once returned his calls within minutes began sending polite emails through counsel. Vanessa's questions changed too. At first she sounded supportive. Daniel took most of her calls in the basement, but our house carried sound through the vents. "You're still CEO in practice," she told him one night. "They can't just erase 18 years. "I know. And Claire can't keep the house, right?" "That's complicated." "What does complicated mean?" "It means the lawyers are sorting it out." A pause. "You told me the house was yours." "It's ours." "Then why did your attorney say it may be treated as separate property?" Daniel lowered his voice, but I could still hear the strain. "Vanessa, this is temporary." "So is the apartment gone?" "No. It's locked, Daniel." Another silence. Then came the question she had apparently been avoiding. "How much money do you actually have?" He did not answer. After that, their calls became shorter. Daniel started leaving the house to meet her in coffee shops and hotel bars, places where he could still pretend he was conducting business. He returned more agitated each time. One Friday afternoon, Margaret asked me to come downtown. The private investigator had delivered additional material. "I want to be careful with this," Margaret said as we sat in her conference room. "It may not be admissible in every context, but it helps us understand motive." She played an audio recording captured in the public seating area of a hotel lounge. Vanessa's voice came first. "I thought he owned the company." Another woman laughed. "So did he." Vanessa lowered her voice. "No, I'm serious. He talks like everything is his. The house, the business, the accounts. Now I find out his wife's family owns the controlling interest. What are you going to do? What do you think? You love him, don't you?" Vanessa laughed again. It was not a nervous laugh. It was dismissive. "I love the life he promised me." The room went silent. Then she said the sentence that stripped away whatever fantasy remained. "He isn't wealthy, he's married to wealth." I listened without moving. Margaret stopped the recording. "Are you all right?" "Yes, but I wasn't. Not because I felt sorry for Daniel. Because once, years earlier, I had loved the man Vanessa was mocking. I had loved him before the title, before the tailored suits, before he learned to mistake access for ownership. Somewhere along the way, admiration had become his addiction. Vanessa had simply offered it in concentrated form. That evening, Daniel came home before 6. He sat at the kitchen table without removing his coat. "She ended it," he said. I placed the grocery bag on the counter. I had expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. "What did she say?" "That she needs distance." He gave a hollow laugh. "She said this has become toxic." I started putting milk in the refrigerator. "She's afraid the investigation will damage her business." "That sounds reasonable." He looked at me sharply. "You're enjoying this?" "No." "You hated her." "I don't know her well enough to hate her. She said she never asked me to leave you." "Did you believe that?" He looked down. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he whispered, "I thought she loved me." I closed the refrigerator door. "You thought she loved the version of you that required no sacrifice." His face tightened, but he did not argue. He packed a small bag that night and said he was going to the apartment. I reminded him the lease had been suspended.